So, I've spent the last month working on a low poly Call of Duty style game. There is a bit of a catch. I have zero experience in game development, modeling, programming, coding, anything to do with games, apart from this one game that I made about 8 years ago. But if I'm going to be honest, I'm not even going to talk about that. I really came into this with zero experience at all, no idea how to use Unity, which was the engine that I decided to use, or Blender for modeling or anything like that. So I'm really going into this with zero experience. The game that I've got so far, you guys can see it in the background right now. This is the current stage that it's at. I'm quite proud of how far I've got so far. For some people, they could probably do this in a day, but I'm brand new to it, and yeah, the purpose of this, I'm just basically going to walk you guys through my process. I've kind of been logging the development from day one. The key point that I kind of wanted to point out is I literally came into this with no experience. This entire thing has been built up from an amalgamation of tutorials that I found on YouTube, Stack Overflow, Google, Reddit, just kind of searching around everywhere for answers and how to implement things. There's a specific reason that I've decided to do it this way. It's something I would like to learn on a bit more, but the way that I find things a lot easier to learn, I need to take on something slightly bigger first and just get a general idea of how things work before I then start breaking it down into the smaller pieces. Because I'm going into this with no experience on Unity, Blender, absolutely anything, I wanted to kind of push the boat out, get something that I would kind of feel proud of, even though I don't really understand what I'm doing, and then kind of move forward from that. So after I've finished creating this game, if that's what you want to call it, I'm then going to go on and start kind of digging a bit deeper, starting to actually learn C#, which is the programming language that Unity uses. But yeah, let's jump straight into kind of the development process of this game so far. So the first thing I did, that pretty much anyone who is new to game development does, I went onto YouTube because I knew the first thing that I needed was a character controller, an actual playable character. So I searched on YouTube, found a Brackeys tutorial, and then implemented a simple character controller so that I could move around, look around, and also jump. This straight away came with a couple of issues, but I did manage to sort them out. The next thing I then kind of implemented from someone else's code was a sprint script into that one so that I could actually sprint around. And I had an issue where if I would walk forwards and sideways at the same time, my speed would double because my speed forwards and my speed sideways were two different things. So if I clicked them at the same time, I'd go twice as fast. Had to iron that one out as well. I then spent the next like 3 days trying to work out crouching. This one was super difficult. The thing that made this really hard going into it with no experience was I was basically trying to amalgamate code from one person's script and then try and implement that into someone else's script with having no idea of how to do that. But after 3 days of trial and error, I managed to get crouching working. I had issues with the camera not following the player or the player going down but not coming back up. And then my biggest issue that I had that took the longest was the head collider. So I would just I'd go under something, I'd be able to crouch, but then when I'd pop back up, my head would just stick through the ceiling. And it took me a good while to figure out how to get that one fixed, but I did do that eventually. The next part of the character controller that I decided to then work on, which I believe was the final part of it, was a climbing script. This one was actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be, and I managed to add like a little UI text pop-up when you're near something that's climbable. You just walk up to it. When that text shows up, you can hold space and it just vaults you up to the top of whatever that object is, basically, as long as it's within a certain height of the player. But with that done, that was pretty much the entire character controller completed. So then I decided to move on to the next part, which would have been the weapon system. So I spent an entire day working on the weapons, and I just really wasn't happy with how it was working. There were so many bugs, and I just knew it was going to take me absolutely ages to fix it. I had this issue where when I was crouching, the muzzle flash would go off every time that I stood back up, and the weapon switching wasn't working properly, and for some reason the weapons were causing my movement to go weird. It just wasn't going great, so I actually decided to scrap the entire first weapon system that I implemented and go ahead with a different tutorial, which then I implemented weapon switching. I also wasn't too happy that I was using pre-made assets from the asset store for the guns. I did it originally just because I wanted to have something in place so that I could actually work on this, but the whole point of me doing this entire project was to kind of learn the process of using Unity, using Blender, learning how everything works basically. So me using assets off the asset store wasn't really an option, it was more of just like a placeholder thing. Obviously I'm not going to be able to create anything that looks as good, but that's kind of the whole point. I'm still learning, so I needed to kind of put something in place just so that I could actually get something in place to work as a gun, but then I had to move on to creating the actual models myself. I then implemented a reloading system, which I had to pull from a different script, and managed to get all of that working for both guns. I had some issues with the UI, but that was a little bit later on. The next thing I then began to work on was starting to try and do a little bit of modeling so that I could actually kind of create the start of what was going to be the map, and this was kind of my first time dipping my toes into Blender properly, so I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I was using tutorials, but I still really didn't have a clue kind of what was going on or what I was doing, and I did initially have a couple of collider issues when I was first putting things in place, but it didn't take me very long to realize that colliders were the issue, so all I had to do was just rearrange the colliders and add in a few more to kind of like open up the doorways and things like that. But after that I then began kind of working on the map a little bit more. There were a couple of errors that were involved with the map, but this was kind of the map process so far. I kind of took a few tutorials on creating low poly cars and things like that to try and build up the environment. Basically I didn't want it to be too open because it would make the game too easy, so I just kind of started working on things that I could kind of put that would work as like a blockade for the character. So maybe some things would block your line of sight, or some things would just be in the way. I needed something to kind of bulk up the area. And then the thing that I started working on after that was a wave system, which took me quite a long time to get right, and there were quite a lot of bugs that were included whilst I was going through this. Things like the enemies had no gravity and they were just floating around, or the gravity was working but there was a hitbox issue and I couldn't hit the enemies, which again turned out to be like a collider issue where the collider was too small on the enemy, so the bullets weren't always registering. And then digging a bit deeper into the wave system, there were a couple of goofy errors where I was trying to get the waves working so they were actually in like a wave-based system, and it would just spawn like infinite amount of enemies and just like an ocean of green capsules would just start spewing out from where the spawn points were. That was quite an entertaining one. But once I managed to get all of that sorted, I spent some time working on the ammo UI so that you could actually see the ammo for the guns, wave UI so that you could actually track what wave you were on, and also a kill UI. And after I'd got all of that sorted, I also managed to get the spawning working for the waves. The kill UI still actually isn't fully implemented, but I'm going to kind of use that like the point system that already exists on Call of Duty Zombies. So you get a certain amount of points for actually shooting the enemies, and then you'll be able to use those points to maybe buy things that are off the wall, or maybe even like a mystery box, something like that. That's kind of further in the future. I don't think I'm going to be able to do anything like that as of yet. The next thing I then began working on was a health bar. Took me a good little while to kind of get something like that sorted, just to try and work out how to implement it all. Obviously a lot of the textures, images, things like that are placeholders at the moment, very similar with this one because it almost just looks like Minecraft health, but I'm happy that I managed to get it working. And this right here is my Trello board, so I kind of created like a to-do list basically of like the general basis of what I wanted it to do as like a full game loop. Current bugs that I have that need fixing, and then things that I would like to do in the future, like the animations, the models and things like that, just kind of in a bit more detail. The core reason why I kind of picked Call of Duty Zombies as the game to kind of try and recreate, I spent a good while trying to think of something that wasn't too big of a scope, because I always hear people saying don't pick things that are too big in scope because you'll just never finish it and you'll just end up feeling more unsatisfied than you did before you even started trying to make anything. And I thought Call of Duty Zombies, because there's not too much like story-based content, so I don't need to keep creating new scenes and creating UI and create a whole like storyline for it, because that's something that I think I would probably lose interest fairly quickly. I just knew that all I needed to do was create a character controller, a wave-based system, and a high score system. That was it. That's basically all that you really kind of need on like a base level, which is what you can see on the far left. That's like the core game loop. Once I kind of got all of that sorted, I worked a little bit more on the enemy model. Still looks a little bit goofy, there's no animations or anything like that. I kind of added in the glowing eyes that the Call of Duty Zombies have currently. I also used a skybox asset off the asset store, just a free one, and I also implemented fog just so that the map looked a little bit more spooky. And that kind of leads me up to the point that I'm at now, which is the clip that you saw at the start. is how the game's currently looking. There is still a lot more that I would like to do in the development of this. Like I said, I'd like to add things that you can buy off the walls with the kill points. I need to add animations, I need to add sound. There's a load more stuff that I want to add into this, and I think that I could. I still think that I'm going to put some more time into it and see what I can actually finally get out of this. When it is finished, maybe I'll create an itch.io page for people to play, if anyone wants to. Yeah, to be honest, I'm super happy with the progress that I've managed to make so far, considering I've done all of this with zero experience. All I've been doing is just kind of using tutorials, copying code, and I have been learning quite a lot so far. I would say, if I was to kind of rate it in terms of how much I've learned using the actual engine Unity, I would still say I'm a beginner, but I don't have zero experience anymore. I know what things do and where things are. Same with Blender, still a beginner, but I don't have zero experience anymore. I know what things are, where to use them, etc. In terms of actually coding and programming, I wouldn't say that I'm a beginner. I would say I'm whatever a step below a beginner is, but I don't have no experience. I understand a few simple things now, but it's all been a good learning experience so far. I'm planning to continue on with making this. If you guys have any suggestions of what I could maybe implement into the game, or things that I can maybe make a bit better, feel free to drop it down in the comments below. I'd super appreciate to have a look into it. I think it would be quite useful for me to kind of push myself out there and try and implement other things that people kind of recommend to put in there. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this so far. I'll keep you guys posted on the progress with the next devlog once I've spent some more time working on it, kind of started implementing a few more things. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing down below if you want to follow the progression of this, and leave a like on the video. Appreciate you guys watching, and have a good rest of your day. Bye.